Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, social marketers from around the world. My name is Patrick Cook, and as president of the International Social Marketing Association, it's both my privilege and pleasure to introduce the 30th in a series of webinars designed to advance social marketing teaching, research, and practice. I'm here today with Susie Coppathorne, Catherine Sadler, and Jay Kassir. Susie is our technical host for the webinar series. Catherine helped organize today's webinar, and she'll be moderating as well. And Jay is the manager for our webinar series. Before we begin, though, I wanted to just take a moment to update you on some of the activities of the International Social Marketing Association. For those of you who joined us for our recent annual general meeting at the beginning of this month, you heard that we are currently looking for new members to join us on the board of directors for the International Social Marketing Association. Nominations are now open, so we would love it if you would like to nominate yourself or a colleague. We're looking for up to 4 new members to join the board starting in the summer around July. And we are also, as member of the board, or as new members of the board, you're also eligible, and we would welcome your interest in joining us as the treasurer or the vice president. And we're also looking for a webinar manager. So for all the information on how to nominate yourself or someone else, please do go to the website. There's information there. And if you have any questions, just let us know. Nominations are due by February 4th, so think about it and get your nomination in. Now, I'd like to turn the webinar over to our webinar manager, Jay Kassir. Jay?
Thanks, Patrick, and welcome everyone. I want to remind you that if there's more than one of you at your location, we would appreciate it if you'd let us know how many are using the chat box on the left-hand side. That's the only way we know how many people we're reaching. Also, please ask questions using that chat text box as they come to you. Don't wait till the end of the talk. We'll answer your question at the end in roughly the same order as they come in during the webinar. And with this number of people, I think we will skip the 2 polls and go right over to the introduction, which is in your hands, Catherine. Over to you.
Thanks, Jay. I'm happy to introduce Brooke Tully as the featured presenter for today's webinar. Brooke Tully, who many of you may know by her maiden name of Brooke Sadowski, started her career working in commercial advertising. She helped clients like American Express build brand awareness and loyalty, change preferences, and sell products. Looking to apply these skills to more meaningful work, Brooke discovered the field of social marketing and joined Rare Conservation. While at Rare, she trained and mentored partners around the globe in designing and implementing behavior change campaigns for a variety of environmental issues. In 2016, Brooke took the leap into the world of self-employment and now works with nonprofits to design marketing strategies that promote and motivate action. She has also been with ISMA board since early 2017 and more recently serves as the SMANA rep for ISMA US, our board. Brooke, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. And thank you for everyone who's joining, whether it's your evening or your morning time, or if you live in New Zealand, it's your afternoon time, which is actually a fact I just learned while preparing for this webinar. So I'm excited to be here with you. I'm going to be talking today about a topic that I love talking about, and that's designing messages that motivate actions and behaviors. Catherine did go through my bio, so you have a sense of some of the journey I've done through commercial marketing to nonprofit behavior change communication, which was really primarily in the environmental sphere. And now as a self-employed person, I do very similar work to what I did when I was at Rare. But really, throughout all of these, different phases of my career journey, I've been focused a lot and learning a lot about why people do the things that they do. and how marketing can be used to create change. And I really feel very strongly that marketing can be used as a powerful tool to motivate and create change. And in many ways, that's actually why I moved on from the ad agency industry, is I felt like the things we were doing there were so powerful and could be applied to even greater good. So I'm happy to be sharing some of this with you today. What we'll be covering over the next 30 minutes or so will be what prevents people from taking action and adopting behaviors, so what's actually stopping that from happening, and ingredients for overcoming challenges and motivating action through campaign messages or throughout an entire social marketing behavior change campaign. And there will be time for questions. As Jade mentioned, if you could put them in the box as we talk, we'll try to cover as many as we can before the end of the time today. But first, a bit of context. Social marketing and behavior change campaigns are very complex, require a lot of planning, and I'm certainly not going to be covering the entire process and all the steps involved in that. Really, today's topic comes in at a particular point in the process when you're looking at designing and delivering the creative elements of a social change campaign. So this would be sort of an example of what that process, that timeline would look like. And where we're at today, or for this webinar, is step number 4, concept development. This does assume that you and your program team, your projects, have already gone through the first 3 steps of fully diagnosing the problem that your program's trying to address, whether that's in the environment sphere, the health sphere, education, otherwise. You've done the due diligence to identify the audiences related to some of those issues and have done both qualitative and quantitative research on those audiences, and I like stressing both of those types of research. You've determined the desired behavior to promote, so that really comes from identifying what are the behaviors contributing to these problems and which behaviors are we going to be promoting in place of that to help solve the issue we're addressing. And at this point, you would have developed a strategy and plan for creating change. So all the bits and pieces, all the partners that need to come together, how do they line up and what's the synergy they will have together to affect change. So we're at the point of the creative development phase, and why I like to focus on this point is because there's really a question here that we're exploring, which is how do we convert a strategy and a plan for change into messages that will truly motivate change. And certainly having a solid strategy and plan in place is extremely important. But we won't see the results we're looking for if the execution, the implementation side, the creative pieces aren't doing the heavy lifting of motivating change that we could. And there have been many cases where we've seen programs and projects kind of fall a little flat in their results because a great strategy, a great plan wasn't translated into motivating and compelling messages and campaign materials. Before we jump into the meaty part of what motivates change, I first want to really get real about why people don't do things. What are the reasons people are hesitant or maybe passive or apathetic about making change? There's a lot in this slide, so we're going to spend some time on it to unpack it a little bit. This is a selection of behavioral economics and cognitive psychology concepts that really can explain our existing biases and default behaviors. This is not a comprehensive view of behavioral economic concepts. I have hand-selected some that I enjoy talking about and that I think are very relevant to the marketing message side. On the left-hand side, we have some concepts that stand between people doing nothing at all or actually doing something. So this includes status quo bias. So this is our general preference for the things being the way they are as is, as opposed to having them change or changing them. Confirmation bias. This is when new information we receive is only really confirming and affirming our existing beliefs. That often means that we are either consciously or subconsciously filtering or ignoring information that does not directly align or confirm our existing beliefs. And loss aversion, so preferring not to act for risk of losing something. And losing something is not necessarily just financial loss. but also time, energy, effort, loss. And so we prefer not to do anything for risk of losing any of those things. So those are, again, some selected concepts that stand between people doing nothing and doing something. So people aren't even getting out of the chair because of a lot of these reasons. On the right-hand side, these are some concepts that stand in between intention and action. So, we do talk about an intention-action gap, and this prevents people from completing what they want to do, whether it's an action or behavior, even when they have the desire, the interest, and the actual intention to do so. They even may be in the process of trying to do something different or new, and many of these things stand in the way. So, for example, choice overload. When there's just too many options, that it causes analysis paralysis, and it's kind of like impossible to make a decision or figure out which direction to go in, so therefore nothing happens. A lack of efficacy. Often this is a perceived lack of efficacy, which means that you don't really believe that you are capable of making the change that you're trying to make or that someone is asking you to make. Or it bleeds into locus of control, which is you're not totally convinced that the change you're going to make will have an impact. And that's a big problem. I feel like that very much falls in kind of our climate change world of that being a problem. And lastly here, hassle factors. So these are small inconveniences in the process of making change that are inconvenient enough to kind of give up trying and stop making the effort. So these are some things that are very real, and they present real challenges to us. There are biases, our beliefs, even our hard wiring, and they can make it actually quite difficult to achieve our social change goals as we intend to. But there are methods we can use in our communication and our marketing. So communication being not necessarily materials and things more formal, but could be in-person trainings, workshops, dialogue settings. There's things we can do in communication and marketing to help overcome these challenges and motivate change. So getting at the meat of today's presentation is these 5 ingredients to include in messaging, in campaigns that can overcome the challenges and motivate change. And that includes having a clear and specific ask, making it as easy as possible to do, providing social proof, empowering the audience, and making it personal. So the first 2 are starred as I really believe that they are mandatory to have. So you must have a clear and specific ask, and it must be as easy as possible to do the behavior. I kind of consider those deal breakers in a campaign. The other 3 are really complementary to those, and you can do a combination of either all 3, or you can cherry pick one that's going to be best for the audience and the goals you're trying to achieve. But those first 2 are mandatory. So I'm going to look at each of these 5 in more detail and give some examples of campaigns and programs that have applied these ingredients in different ways. So the first one is on choice overload, and that's one of the things that create that intention-action gap. So to help your audience avoid choice overload, your campaign needs to have a clear and specific ask. And really, when our audience feels unsure or overwhelmed on what to do, they just are likely to not do anything at all. And I've seen a lot of times in our work in behavior change and social marketing that campaigns are often giving too many options. A dozen ways to save energy. I even saw earlier today 9 ways to reduce your use of plastic. And they're all very helpful and interesting, but they don't guide me in a direction in terms of which way to choose. Or campaigns give kind of no real options, where it's a little bit too vague. So just a save energy message, or save our reefs is something that's been out forever. Even just kind of a blanket use less plastic. These are all important things, but they don't guide people towards an action. So if we want to get people up out of their seats and doing something, we need to give them a clear direction in which way to go. Microsoft does this well with their Make What's Next campaign. This is a campaign that's been running. They've done different iterations of this over the last 3 years. This is a campaign that encourages girls to stay in STEM classes. So they found out in their research that the biggest problem was the dropout rate from STEM. So 7 out of 10 girls are interested in STEM, but only 2 go on to pursue it. So it wasn't the fact that girls at this age weren't interested at all. So they could have easily jumped to a campaign that said, STEM is cool and this is why you should do it. Instead, they found this kind of really great insight that girls are interested, but they aren't receiving the reinforcement and validation they need to stay and pursue it. And they weren't even really getting messages from entertainment and the media world that other women had done this before. So they really cut to the chase with their campaign. Again, they've done sort of different ones each year. This one I like to give an example of because it's, stay in STEM. That is a really clear, direct message. There's a lot of other vague ones they could have gone with of, STEM is great and, consider STEM, but they really cut to the chase and made it very clear on stay in STEM. And as you dig into that, they give even more specific options of how to do that. For example, do an hour of code. And the research there is that if people are actively doing code, they're more likely to continue their interest and their reinforcement in different parts of the STEM field. Something at this scale where this is a huge national shift, it can be hard to measure, but they are seeing some really great movement and progress in this work and from these campaigns. And again, these campaigns don't even run all year long. They run during certain times of the year over the last few years. So they've seen a spike in research and web searches for women inventors. That's part of that validation and affirmation that women have done this. And an increase in website engagement specifically for the Make What's Next campaign URL. And that's really showing an interest in learning more, engaging more, and continuing down this clear path. This is the only example I'm going to give for clear and specific ask, but you will see other campaigns I show later on also embody these same principles. So the second mandatory, which really is more about the execution than the messaging, is to remove the hassle factors and really, if you can, avoid future hassle factors by making the action as easy as possible to do. In our work, a lot of times we talk about removing the barriers to change, and that's absolutely necessary to achieve our goals. But hassle factors are referring to these even smaller inconveniences in the process that may unknowingly, even unknowingly to us, make an action or a behavior difficult to complete. And sometimes this even comes in like user-centered design or the lack of user-centered design in some of these processes or these steps we're asking people to take. Some of us have experienced this ourselves in a daily basis when we're looking to buy something, whether it's online or off, and you get to the checkout line or the checkout process and it's just too long, it's too slow, it's too cumbersome, and we basically just say, forget it. And that's actually the impact a hassle factor can have is people who are trying to do something, it gets a little bit too difficult or inconvenient, and you just abandon the idea altogether. And once people do that, especially if it's their first time trying to do something new, they may never come back and try again. So it is really important to remove these. An example I'm going to give here is from a project that a group called Ideas 42, which is a behavioral economic consulting firm, they worked on with New York City to reduce missed court dates. So New York City was having an issue of people that have done misdemeanor or low-level offenses. There was actually a 40% missed court rate appearance, which is really pretty high. And this is certainly an issue for New York City that's trying to have an effective and functioning justice system. But it's also an issue for those who are missing these court appearances. Because in New York City specifically, and other cities and states have this as well, missed court appearance, even for a low-level offense, can result in an arrest warrant. And that can certainly mess up somebody's record. And a lot of times these missed appearances are kind of accidental. They didn't mean to. They just had no idea about their date or which building to go to. Many times that was because the form. And so the form on the left is the original form that notifies someone that they have a court appearance. And they just found that this whole form did not communicate clearly, and sort of like not surprising that a government form would have this problem, right? Not clear, people didn't know where to go, they were showing up to the wrong building, It wasn't even clear that this was like a necessary thing as a next step. So Ideas 42 worked with the city to redesign the form to make it simpler, clearer, and actually just more intuitive. And then added in text message reminders that not only said, hey, don't forget that you have this court appearance on this date, but have you planned how you're going to get there and when you're going to leave? That's a method of avoiding future hassle factors. Certainly someone can have all the intentions of showing up, and if they land in the wrong building or they didn't plan enough time, they may still miss that appearance. So adding the two things together saw a 36% decrease in missed dates. So it's really, and some people may just say, oh, all they did was design a new form, but reducing these hassle factors actually had a really great impact on ensuring that there's going to be fewer people missing their court appearances, which is beneficial both for the city and for those individuals. Some other examples, which I won't go into in as much depth, the one on the left is an emoji that was created for teens and youth that are online or even over text message to call out bullying behavior when they saw it. And oftentimes, we have a lot of steps when we want people to report bullying, and this was an immediate thing you can download onto your phone, have on your keyboard, and press and call out bullying right when it happens. So if you're asking people to take a stand against bullying, which is honestly, can feel a little scary and daunting, they simplified it in this way and removed those hassle factors or even that drag factor that could prevent people from doing this. The example on the right is from Heifer International. You can go on their website and play around with this. A really clear call to action here of donate an animal, and they made it very simple to do. You can just drag the sliding scale to say what you want to contribute and press Give Now. I know many of our projects may not be about soliciting donations, but we are often asking people to sign a petition, to join, to share, any of those other behaviors. And sometimes the online functionality can really be a drag, and it can be the thing that prevents people from taking action. So not only making it simple, but making it fun doesn't hurt either. So moving on from the mandatories to some of the other ingredients, providing social proof, which really means showing or describing what other people are doing, can overcome inertia, so the status quo bias, and the confirmation bias. In many ways, it overcomes that by creating this sense of FOMO, fear of missing out. And I'm going to repeat a joke I did earlier, a sense of what I'm trying to coin as FOBLO, F-O-B-L-O, which is fear of being left out, which to me is like a nuance different from missing out. Is you don't want to be left out. You don't want to be the one person that's not doing what everybody else seems to be doing today. It also overcomes a perceived sense of perceived lack of self-efficacy. As the more you see other people doing something, the more it starts to instill a belief that you too can do that same thing. And so for this example, I like showing the No More campaign. This program leveraged a lot of really important social influencers, celebrities, but also really NFL players. This is a campaign that's really shifting the dialogue on domestic violence and sexual assault, and really engaging more people in this dialogue in terms of their stance and their opinions. The reason why NFL players was so important is when this first came out, or when they were in their first year of coming out, it's when there really were a lot of cases and situations of NFL players being found for domestic violence and for sexual assault. And to then engage other NFL players in making the statement, making the stance, it really shifts the entire conversation, but also starts to shift what we consider to be acceptable behavior, and in essence shifts the social norm around what's acceptable behavior. This campaign really stemmed from a study that showed that only 3 out of 4 parents, so 73% of parents, were talking. 3 out of 4 parents were not talking to their kids about sexual assault, and 64% of Americans said if we talked about this more, it would make it easier to support someone. So realizing that this is not a conversation that was happening publicly, that it still felt kind of taboo to talk about it, was a really great opportunity to bring in the more social proof that we can talk about this and we have strong feelings about this. They did this using self-written cards, public commitments, as a sign a pledge or take a pledge, social sharing about experiences, that's on the top right corner, and showcasing people taking a stand. Again, something at this scale and looking to kind of create this really large shift in our social norms can be hard to measure, but this program has been joined by 1,200 organizations, 75,000 people, and there's been 30 state-based like adaptations of this campaign. So it really is having an impact in that sense. Now, Weight Watchers, granted this is a for-profit example, also tapped into social proof by featuring actual members in their ads. So this is, in the center is an image of one of their commercials with Weight Watchers members who have been on the program, who have lost weight through the program. These are twins, so I'm assuming they had the same results, but I'm not sure. They're talking to other potential members and telling them why they like the program, why they're into it, and how it has worked for them, even when they maybe didn't think it was going to work for them. And that's a great form of social proof. And Weight Watchers even created an app called Connect, where members can it's actually just for members, they share their goals, their up and downs, their milestones that they achieved, even the times when maybe they didn't achieve their goals, different recipes, different point hacks, and it's all this very supportive, collaborative network where you have people, even people who don't know each other, and most of them don't really know each other, are supporting one another in this effort to adopt a healthier lifestyle. And this just shows like social proof. It's when you know that others are making a change and you're learning and sharing with them, it really motivates further change. And this is something that I think, even though Weight Watchers has done this, I think it could be applied to any program that's looking to encourage a healthier lifestyle. One of the main reasons social proof has become so important, and this is actually a table from a 2017 trend watching report, that people now trust other people like themselves just as much as they trust technical and academic experts. And that's huge when you see these three bars at 60%, and peer is up there with expert and academic. That's showing that this is a movement, and people are looking increasingly to one another, even folks they don't know but who they believe are like them, as a source of reference and influence. So empowering the audience and even priming them that they can do the behavior we're asking them to do will produce more positive results and overcome their existing beliefs that they don't have the ability or that they don't necessarily have to be the ones who take action. In a lot of commercial marketing, they talk about creating aspiration. And this is, aspiration can also be a little bit broad, although I do think it can be very powerful. In our work in social marketing behavior change, taking that to another level of not just aspirational, but empowerment is really important to overcome some of these barriers we have that make us feel like maybe we can't do it, or maybe it's not on our shoulders to do it. An example of this is from a program or an organization, nonprofit organization called Adopt Us Kids. And I'll point out too that the Microsoft Make What's Next and Weight Watchers are also great examples of empowerment. So this is a teen adoption campaign. The data showed that 43% of children available for adoption were in the 15-18 age range, yet only 5% of this age group was being adopted. That's a fairly small percentage. And they found that much of the reason behind this low rate is that adults who were looking to adopt that either have never had kids or have not yet had kids of that age didn't believe they had the experience and ability to give teens what they needed to thrive. So not just any teen, but also teens that are coming out of a foster system, they just felt they weren't equipped and maybe they weren't the right people to be parents. And knowing that research, knowing that insight, this campaign really, even kind of made fun of it and had a playful approach while also empowering those potential parents. So you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. I think anyone who's a parent knows that it's really never about perfection. That's probably an impossible goal. And that's is also true for when you're adopting teenagers. You're going to do the best you can, provide everything that you can, love the best you can, but perfection maybe is not a goal here. So in addition to these great campaigns and some really funny commercials that provided empowerment, they also created booklets that were, I thought, kind of cute, what to expect when you're expecting a teen, which is a play off the baby books, but did provide tips on, what it is that teens need at this stage and how, really anybody that is looking to love a child, is able to provide that no matter what age they're coming out of the foster system. And this did, have some great results over the years they were running it. 22,000 teens were with permanent families and far more inquiries. So again, the inquiries aren't showing like bottom line impact, but to see a shift from those who want to become, who want to be adopting children to be inquiring more about adopting teen children is a great shift and a great result of a campaign like this. Recently, there was some new research out on using dynamic norms. So descriptive norms tells like what other people have already done. Dynamic norms describes what other people are trying to do. And using a technique like that can really help with both providing empowerment and social proof. And the quote here is, just learning that other people are changing can instigate all these psychological processes that motivate further change. People can begin to think that change is possible, that change is important, and that in the future, the norms will be different. So it really sends a signal that things are starting to change. I don't want to be left out. But also, if other people are trying, I can try this too. And actually, one of the examples of the study is, I think they showed a sign at a restaurant saying more people are trying to eat less meat or eat more plant-based meals. And that actually encouraged and drove more people to order vegetarian meals. Just knowing, not even a percentage, just knowing that other people are trying to do this. So that has real potential to be very powerful, and definitely warrants further exploration. So lastly, to overcome both status quo bias and loss aversion, we can and we should make the desired change personally meaningful and personally beneficial. This can sometimes be hard to do, especially in our line of work, because sometimes we're asking for a behavior change that's like on behalf of others. So, save a species in another part of the world, save a habitat that's not near where you live. Do this on behalf of another group of people that really would benefit from it. So it can be hard to make the benefit of the behavior personal, but it's really critical to do to motivate action and overcome these biases. So a few examples of efforts that maybe didn't initially at first blush have a personal benefit, found one and used those to promote their actions and behaviors, desired behaviors. The top left is protect the crab cake population. So this was really protecting crabs from fertilizer use during certain times of the year, which people who live in that area may not care that much about the crab habitat, and they may not think they care about crabs, but they do care about their crab cake. So that made it very personal and motivating. On the top right, it says shopping with a plan helps your wallet. This is actually a campaign to reduce food waste. And some people don't care that much about the waste of food that once it goes into the trash can. They're not thinking about it. And they may not be equating it to actually a loss of funds, that you've actually wasted money by throwing that food away. In order to change that behavior, they're talking about how to shop smarter so that you aren't wasting any money and you aren't throwing money into the trash or even into the compost bin. And the one on the bottom, encouraging energy savings at home. Oftentimes we see that this is better for the environment, but a real personal message is, one, it's better for your wallet because you'll spend less money, but also you can't have your neighbors be better than you. That sucks. So make a change so that you're at least on par with your efficient neighbors. And that's actually been gaining wider spread adoption across the nation as more and more counties and districts adopt this idea of showing how you're doing with your energy use compared to your neighbors. Another example for this, to make it personal, is Ad Council's campaign to prevent buzz driving. And this particular effort. This is part of a larger and longer running campaign. But this actually execution really stood out for me because they made it really personal to younger drivers by showing the potential embarrassment of getting pulled over. The image on the left is a screen grab from the commercial, and this young guy gets pulled over because he was buzz driving, and everyone else in the car is kind of mortified and embarrassed and, feels a little bit ashamed of being in the car with this person, even, where they're going to Snapchat publicly, not impressed. And then even the embarrassment of having to, bring your parents in because lawyers cost money and you need your folks to kind of help out with that. So it's definitely targeting a younger audience, but it moved beyond a message of fear for how your behavior may harm others, because actually no one in these commercials were harmed. This man's behavior didn't cause harm on anyone else, but more made it about a personal story of where you could get really embarrassed and you could feel a great sense of shame for what you've done. So again, the numbers here are really about the overall campaign and not just this specific execution, but they have seen an uptick in percentage of people say that when they feel buzzed, they're going to opt for not driving and take another form of transportation. That's up from 38%. And they have seen, thankfully we're seeing a decrease in alcohol-impaired driving fatalities, which, we need as much of that as possible. So I've shown different examples for each of these messages. Some of these had, really decent-sized budgets behind them. So I want to kind of bring it all together to show how one project can incorporate these message ingredients in different ways, all without having a lot of money behind it. This is a project I worked on with World Wildlife Fund Mongolia, and the goal was to shift fishing behaviors from catch and kill to catch and release fishing. And I will point out that this is a project, fishermen were not fishing for food, for subsistence. This was recreational fishing. So the behavior change trade-off is not quite as huge as if you're asking people to give up a source of food. This was already a sport fish, already recreational. The issue was fishermen were keeping the fish really for bragging rights as opposed to releasing it back. So there were a lot of things we wanted to tell fishers to do. We had kind of the laundry list of things that we needed for sustainable fishing behaviors. Everything from how do you handle the fish once it's caught, how do you take the hook out, what are the seasons of fishing, what gear can you use, what parts of the river, and so on. But we really focused on the one clear and specific ask, releasing taimen after they're caught. Taimen is the specific fish species. We included the idea of taking a picture so they still have proof, they still get those bragging rights, and it removes that pressure of actually having the dead fish to show off by taking a picture. And funny enough, a short side story, this came out of a conversation of making a very sarcastic comment of take a picture, it'll last longer, and it actually turned into one of the strategies for this campaign, which is very funny how these things happen. Now, handling the fish, proper handling the fish was a big deal and a big need, but rather than include it in the specific ask, which we wanted to keep really tight and focused, we showed it in the imagery. And really the goal there was by demonstrating how a fisher looks when he's getting his picture taken, we can also send the message that this is the proper handling of. To make it as easy as possible to do and to avoid hassle factors down the road, we conducted some trainings in catch and release techniques with a small subset of fishers. Here, for example, they're practicing bending the barbs on hooks. Using barbed hooks really damages the fish. However, you can't get barbless hooks in this part of Mongolia. So, that certainly would present a hassle factor in doing the desired behavior if you can't even get those kinds of hooks. So we taught them how to bend down the barbs, which is not a hard process, gave them the tools to do that, and really also trained them in a way where they could train other people how to do that. So when they're out in the water, they can do that for any hook that's available. Social proof. This is one of my favorite parts of this campaign, is that billboards with actual images of some of the most popular, well-known fishers in the communities were put up showing the desired behavior and still this clear and specific ask. When we catch taimen, let us release them. And this was put up in the 6 villages where we work so that both all members of the community, both fishers and non-fishers, and anyone coming in from the outside gets an immediate message of this is how fishing is done here. And as you saw earlier in the poster, which was really like a hand-drawn illustration of the behavior, these billboards were created a little bit later in the campaign once we had actual demonstrated behavior by these fishers of doing really what we hoped all fishers would do. So we were able to capture those pictures and then put up these billboards to show what it looks like for fishers of that community that you knew to do the desired behavior. And as social proof, it does send the message of this is how we do it here. For empowerment, World Wildlife Fund had done a wonderful job empowering these fishers by forming them into local fishing clubs and making them responsible for protecting the river and the fish, and for enforcing these new norms with other fishers. Certainly, related to social proof as well, that peer-to-peer communication is extremely powerful. So when you hear another fisher say, this is the way to fish, as opposed to an authority figure, it's much more powerful and much more compelling. And also, these fishers being in these fishing clubs and having been trained, not only felt empowered, but they really felt a sense of accountability, which is ultimately for sustainability's sake what you would hope for and what you want. And lastly, we made it personal. This time it does not exist in most areas, only existed here. It became a symbol of the community. It became a sense of pride. The community started to feel much more protective around this local species. And really the entire community, even non-fishers and children, rallied behind protecting this and enforcing and reinforcing the new norm. And so this is, an example I want to show. They've used these 5 ingredients in different ways through different forms of media. And as a result, they saw some great results in the first year. There were 250 photos of taimen released. Granted, we can't guarantee that, these were 250 totally different taimen. Some of them may have been recaught. Maybe the less smarter ones were recaught. But these were fish that we had proof went back into the water and didn't end up over the fireplace as bragging rights. We saw a huge leap in discussions among fishers about releasing taimen. And this is a huge indicator of intention to change behavior. It went from a little over 12% to a little over 87%. So really majority of fishers were talking to each other about releasing taimen instead of keeping them. And on the monitoring side, we saw almost a 50% increase in taimen in that first year. That was about 288 fish that were monitored in that first year. So those were great results. This campaign has continued on and has actually expanded to other areas as well. And they used to, they really, a lot of what was done here has very much motivated and inspired me to think about what the ingredients were that made it successful. And I've seen it happen on a small scale, on a large scale. I've seen it happen in a variety of campaigns. And really I come to the point where I believe all of our projects can benefit from incorporating these ingredients into our messages and to our programs. And I believe it's very, very possible to incorporate it. So with that, I want to say thank you for taking the time with me. I have put together some resources at this website, so brooks2cents.com/ISMA, specifically for participants and attendees of these webinars. So there'll be other information on there. There's a longer case study on Mongolia on there. In addition to references from all the research and examples I shared today, there's links on there so you can actually go ahead and explore a little bit further some of these campaigns and the work they did, because certainly I could only cover a selection here. And we'll go to questions, but certainly if you have any questions or want to chat about this at any time, please feel free to email me at brooke@brooks2cents.com.
It helps so much when you take me off mute. Thank you so much for a wonderful instructional webinar, Brooke. I really appreciate hearing it and learning from it. I have a couple of questions for you. First off, you again got another thank you for a great presentation. And do you think these important insights can be applied to a broader social force or barrier which prevent people from changing their behaviors? Given social marketing can also be applied much further upstream for structural change, I think to a broader population, Lisa, is that what I'm getting from this? Is that can these be given in a broader spectrum?
I would say, yeah. I mean, I think that with, all of these things end up being a little bit context specific, so it's always hard for me to give like a direct yes or no. Many of these ingredients, another topic I've been talking about is creating larger scale social change, and how do we create those movements. The No More campaign is along those lines. So it's not necessarily a specific action or behavior, but it's a larger shift in acceptable norms. A lot of these ingredients would apply for that as well. Some of them I may mix up a little bit, and I think because of the time of the night, I can't necessarily draw those off the top of my head, but some of it may be in the resources I put in there. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these ingredients I've picked because they work fairly universally, and they work at multiple scale. And one of the reasons I wanted to show the Mongolia case is that it was at a much smaller scale, where some of the others are really at a national or even global scale. So I believe it can work at any level, but there may be adjustments required along the way.
Okay, that brings back the point to the No More campaign, and a lot of times bringing about social change on a large scale like that is difficult to evaluate where the change stems from. How would you go about connecting that particular campaign to evaluating it?
Yeah, and actually, Catherine, I think you hit some of the nail on the head there, is that it can be hard to tell in any of our programs, really what are the key contributing factors to, the change results we're seeing. And there's often a lot of debate and dialogue about this in terms of how much can we really know in terms of why a change is occurring. Many times, and especially when we're talking about the marketing side of things, we're looking for indicators or anything that can show us that there may be some correlation. I'm not sure we would get to the point where there's causation, but so some correlation between how people are receiving the campaign and the messages and the behaviors that they're responding to. So this would mean, really doing, periodic assessments, and both qualitative and quantitative, on receptiveness of the campaign, understanding if there are specific call to actions that are in the messages that may not appear otherwise, like website visits or things like that. Those, again, can be indicators of engagement and shifts. And some of the statistics I showed, or some of the results I showed in this presentation, reflect some of those ways of showing that there seems to be a shift, even if we can't yet show bottom line impact yet. And I think that's, for a lot of our work in behavior change communication and social marketing, that's kind of an ongoing is to figure out how to connect and show these dots around impact.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a question back to the fishing clubs about the fishing clubs empowering local fishermen and encouraging peer-to-peer communication. Didn't the original communication or training come from an authority figure, WWF? What helped the fishermen receive the message from WWF in the first place?
That's a great question, and thank you for asking that. And I will say, World Wildlife Fund, Mongolia's office, and I guess there's some of the backstory that we don't always get to show. I mean, they've really been putting in years of effort and community engagement to gain the trust of these fishermen. Being the best fishermen in the area also meant that they were often the ones fishing illegally most often because they could. And it really was, I want to say probably, several years of effort of getting to know them. Everyone from this part of the Mongolia office were from these villages, were from the local community, were Mongolian. That goes a long way as well. And so through this trust and relationship building that they had, they were able to start by engaging more and more on like the one-on-one discussions with different fishers, and then bring them together. Because also some of these fishers may be a little bit skeptical of one another. And, they kind of represent competition. And it does take time to foster and nurture that. And really, I feel like this campaign came in at a time when those relationships were, going really well, and it presented like everything was kind of ripe for this level of social marketing, behavior change, communication to be really effective. And other examples of this, if you think about, if you want to mobilize, some members of your student body population of a university, oftentimes these students may be on their own with a certain, idea or goals, or they may be in smaller groups. And forming those relationships and those connections and then bringing more people together can create that sense of empowerment and that peer-to-peer communication. And then at some point, you can kind of walk away from it. You almost have replaced yourselves as the messengers, which is really ideal, and have them, move the change forward themselves.
Okay, great. Thank you. So one last question, and that deals with the fact that a lot of behavior change or eventual goals of the behavior change are complex or difficult or multi-layered. How do you dig down to the simple, straightforward message? The simple, straightforward action that you want the target population to use or do?
Yeah, and this, I recognize that this presents such a challenge for people working in this field, and it's one that I've struggled with, working on nearshore fisheries, marine issues in the Philippines. Literally we create laundry lists of things we need fishers to do. And they do represent a list of everything from very complex, even like livelihood trade-off behaviors to maybe something we would consider a little bit of a smaller action, like, coming to monthly meetings. It's certainly a change we need, but isn't quite as large as, not fishing in certain areas. So part of it is breaking down and being clear on what all these various things we're asking and what is the rate and frequency in which these behaviors need to take place. And I do feel like it's important of not getting so overwhelmed by it that we kind of come up to this vague message of, save the shores or save the reefs. But we do hone in on either like tipping point behaviors, so those that if we see a change in that one particular behavior, others are likely to follow. And that's kind of what we did in Mongolia. We, picked the catch and release one, knowing that it's easier for other behaviors to follow and fall in place once we nail that one down. Or if there is time, to sequence them out in phases so that you're not asking for everything up front, but you're bringing people along really a change journey, even building up to some of the more complex behaviors. Again, I think it depends on the budget, the time scale, the scope, and the behavior, but it takes that little bit more of extra push and work to not say, oh goodness, we just need all of this, so let's just message everything, and instead say, okay, we're going to pick some. Like the plastic example I gave before. I think if there were 9 different ads that told me one to not use straws and one to bring a reusable mug, I'd be more likely to pick one than seeing an ad that had all of those things in one.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for the great questions that came in this evening. I am going to send this back to Jay.
Thank you, Catherine. So just want to first of all, I wanted to thank all of you who participated and asked some great questions. Would like you to, as you leave the webinar, please fill out the short evaluation form. We do depend on your answers when developing our upcoming webinars. and doing our promo as well. So please let us know what's working and what you'd like us to do differently in the future. Don't forget that we do have a board of events that are upcoming. And in particular, I'd like to draw your attention to our next webinar on May 30th, Integrating Diversity and Cultural Competence in Social Marketing, Lessons from Healthcare Programs with Radhika Howarth from the UK. And registration is open, so feel free to get your spots, and we look forward to seeing you again then. Finally, thanks to Susie Coppathorne for handling the technical aspects of today's webinar, to Catherine Sadler for helping organize the webinar and for joining our webinar team recently, and to Patrick Cook, who's carrying on the tradition of ISMA webinars. Well, Patrick, over back to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jay, and thank you, everyone. Catherine and Jay, it's been great working with you on this webinar. You and Susie and the entire team make it look so easy and feel so easy. And then, of course, I really wanted to thank you, Brooke, for the wonderful presentation webinar that you delivered a couple times today. Jotted down some excellent notes for myself, so really appreciate that. And mostly I want to thank the members and our guests who joined us for today's webinar. We're really appreciative of your continued support and participation in these events, and we hope to see you at our next webinar coming up in May, as Jay just mentioned. So until then, please do keep visiting the website. We've got lots of events displayed on the calendar there. We have the information on becoming a board member, so don't forget to check that out. And we look forward to you joining us at future webinars. This is the International Social Marketing Association, and we now conclude today's webinar.